Here's 10 ways that you can piss off your mechanic. And thus, here's 10 ways that you can avoid pissing off your mechanic for a happier life, a better looked after bike, oh yeah, and a happier mechanic too. Mechanics are mostly hard-working folks, and they're there to fix your bike and help you, and that brings joy to you because you can ride a better bike, and a better functioning bike is a joyous thing. But they're often slaving away and labouring in backrooms, and often the pay isn't stellar, so adding to their woes isn't probably going to make them happy. So here's some tips to help you avoid pissing off a mechanic. But before we dive into those tips, I've just got a little favour to ask, and that's if you like this video and you like others, if you could give it the thumbs up, and if you haven't already subscribed to the channel, if you could do that too. As an ex-World Cup mechanic and service course technician and neutral service mechanic, I've seen a lot of wild things that did royally piss me off. I should flag, as a race mechanic, things are, well, a little bit different because whilst you're trying to make the bike as best as possible, make it as fast as possible, you're working with a racer that's not actively going out of their way to destroy the bike, but essentially it's their job to make the bike go down the hill as fast as possible and not really care what rock gardens or what huge drops that bike goes through. So it's always a bit of a battle. They're not trying to break the bike, but they're testing components to their very limits and sometimes beyond. Luckily, I've got experience as a neutral service mechanic too, so I've worked with those that are paid to race and those that pay to race. Dirty bikes are a pain, and it's not because mechanics don't mind getting their hands dirty. They get stuck in. No, it's more because it actually slows them down. So if they've got a bottom bracket to change or a headset to change, but the bike's covered in yesterday's ride or the weekend's ride or 2 weekends ago ride, where you've got mud, crud, drool, sick, and God forbid, dog poo on there, it's really going to slow the process down. And not just because it's crusty, no, you're going to get contamination. If you're replacing a bottom bracket or you're replacing cables, you're going to have to clean around that area so you're not contaminating that part with crud and mud from the off. So a clean bike for a mechanic is a happy thing. It's easy to fix as well. Just wash your bike. Easy. There's lots of parts in mountain biking that shouldn't really work together, but sort of do. However, there's lots of parts that are designed to work as an ecosystem and work together. So if you start introducing other brands of parts, don't blame the mechanic when that bike doesn't quite shift as well as it should when you've switched the components around. So make sure that you're using all the correct parts, and if in doubt, you can ask your mechanic for help. They are quite helpful in that regard. For example, trying to make a Shimano shifter with a SRAM brake lever. Yes, there's aftermarket parts that you can find, but essentially those parts aren't really designed to work together. Mechanics in general want you to be safe. Okay, sometimes it might be related to any kind of repercussions of an insurance-related nature after they've worked on your bike and the risk that they're open to, but it's also because they don't want you to get hurt. So don't get mad at them when they're flagging that something is wrong with your bike or something doesn't function. And this sort of safety-first approach works when you're working on your own bike or on one of your pals' bikes, because if something feels a bit clanky or doesn't quite work, and that'll do fix in the work stand fails mid-ride, hopefully it's just a long walk home. At worst, could be an ambulance ride. Take care, do some research about what torque settings are required, because literally your life is in your hands. Potentially your pal's life is in your hands, because if you do a job wrong, well, it could go really wrong. So just take care and be confident of what you're doing on your bike. Mechanics are there to help, but if you roll in with your slightly broken bike that you've tried to fix in a DIY style, I think it's a certain step forward for a very grumpy mechanic. Yes, do work on your own bike. Yes, do the fixes that you know how to do. Do try stuff that you've not tried yet. Use our channel, use our maintenance book as a guide. But if a task feels too much, ask for help before you get in over your head. Taking your bike in when the bolts are rounded out or bolts are really hard to shift, well, it's not going to win any favours. So before you use the famous line of "I was just riding along," when actually you hucked a flat on your down country bike, just have a think about what the optics might look like, because the mechanics are probably going to know. Be honest. Many brands have now got crash replacement policies, and they can be really helpful, but they're often at the discretion of either the bike shop and/or the mechanic. So lying from the off or not telling the full truth, it really won't help. Yes, accidents do happen, but damaging your pride and joy and then not being able to get a crash replacement because you've told, well, an untruth is not great. So being honest and being upfront about where you're riding is a great starting point. The other thing to consider is also that, well, riding the bike in the right terrain. So if you've got a downcountry bike and you're taking it on double black diamond runs, it might not be for the best. Just think about where you're riding. Asking your mechanic to just replace only one component when you take your bike in for a service is a good way to get them annoyed. Why? Because they want your bike to be safe. They want it to be functional on the trail. They want you to have that joy of a perfect bike. And rolling in and saying, oh, well, the brakes are fine, or the chain just needs replacing, when actually it's not really just the chain that needs replacing. It's actually the cassette. It's actually the front chainring. It's actually the rear jockey wheels too. The mechanics aren't asking you as part of some great cartel of getting you to spend more on your bike. No, they want you to have a really good, safe riding experience. So for you to kind of counter this, have a regular maintenance schedule. So if it's time to replace your chain, replace it early. If it's time to replace your cassette, replace it early. Your bike mechanic can help you with this before taking your bike in and ask him just to change the chain in a quickie, because it won't be quick. It's great you're an engineer. I've heard that line a lot, and it's really fun, and it's great to know what your job is. My job is to fix the bike as a mechanic, and I've had lots of training from lots of different brands, from SRAM, from Shimano, from Hayes, on how their components work and how they should work and how they should work together. And it's great that you're an engineer and you can design bridges or high-end medical devices. That's great. And I'm not saying it's not applicable, because there are parallels, there's lots of crossover, but the specifics of bikes, and bikes are getting really specific, means that, well, it's not that useful just to try and pitch that you know more. You probably don't know more than your mechanic, so try and be nice and understand that they've got your well-being and your bike's well-being in their mind. I feel I'm preaching to the converted. You're here watching GMBN so you know what's what. But here's some advice you can impart to your pals, and that's, there's a lot of wear items on a bike. And don't be surprised when they do wear out. You've got tyres, chains, disc brake rotors, disc brake pads. There's a lot of wear items. Even saddles and grips you can wear out, depending on how gritty your conditions are. So I think the key is here that don't be surprised when stuff wears out. Your mechanic isn't trying to be mean to you, it's just stuff does wear. You can invest in things like chain checkers to keep on top of chain wear, because that will help you, well, replace the chain before you need to replace the cassette and the chainring. And likewise, if you replace your disc brake pads, often you might be able to save at least a few rotors. So think about your maintenance. You will have to do it, as wear waits for no one. I've seen it, and I do understand it, and that's sourcing bike parts not from the mechanic. You showing up to the mechanic with a basket full of parts that you've saved a bit of money on for him to fit. Some mechanics are happy to do that, and that's cool, but I think some aren't, and that's because, well, they're there to make a little bit of money, and they can make some money on parts. And it's not just a cabal of bike mechanics all working together to try and get more money from humble cyclists. No, it's because bike mechanics want to fit the right parts from the off. And with bottom bracket standards as confusing as they are, you could well have bought the wrong part. You might have bought maybe the wrong chain. There's counterfeit parts out there too. It is a confusing spectrum. What I'll say is, if the task is engaging enough that you want a mechanic to do it, then source those parts from him. If it's a relatively simple task, like switching a chain, for example, well, learn, upskill, and you can do those. We've touched on this before. Mechanics are deep and driven by many complex things. And one of them is a love of fixing things. And they love seeing you riding a bike. They get a reflected joy of, well, you riding a bike, all that stoke on the trail, fixing something. It's so satisfying and a really amazing way of keeping that stoke high for the mechanic, and that love in the air is not to be a rude. I know, it's quite challenging, but just be nice to them. If they're having a bad day and they are a bit surly and they're a bit grumpy, just be kind. Give them regular treats, be that of a multi-beverage nature or of candy nature. Be kind to them. It goes a really long way. And if you're in a fix for a part and you're out on a ride and near a shop, well, if that mechanic's happy, you might be able to find a quick link for you. You might be able to find a bit of old chain that you can use to fix your bike. Or if your bike's in, he might be able to make do and mend something to keep you on the road and keep you on the trails that weekend. Versus if you're really rude and you're really obnoxious and you're not very nice to them when they work in really relatively tough conditions, just doing it for passion, well, it's not going to work, is it? They're not going to go, ooh, that bloke is so nice. That lady's always so friendly. If it's the opposite, they're not going to help you out. So help them, help you. So it would appear there's quite a lot of ways that you can piss off your mechanic, but think of all the ways that you can help your mechanic, and then they can help you in a wonderful positive feedback loop. Well, hopefully that helps, but let's know how you keep your mechanic on side and keep them really cheery and helpful. Let us know in the comments.